Okay, well, thanks very much, Sue, and once again, thanks to Villanova for hosting us again. It's a great relationship for us, so we'd just like to extend real thanks for your continued support of the work that we do. I'm just going to give a talk a little bit more about focusing in on the agricultural sector, and here we're trying to use technology in a way that promotes more business services to the farming community that we work with. I've got about 500 slides here, so I'm going to get through this quickly. This is a bit of a blur. Let's see how we go. Okay, just to give you some dimensions of the sort of scale of the operations at CRS. In last year, we ran about 320 projects in agriculture across 44 countries. We spend between about 120 and 150 million dollars a year in agriculture. So agriculture is a pretty major theme of the work that we do. Clearly, it's very focused on getting people into this idea of having food security, but also very much getting people into a situation where they have sustainable and growing livelihoods. So we're working with about 5 million people a year. We have a team of about 16 advisors, but we have a lot of partners, as Steve had said, that we work with. And those partners span a real spectrum of different activities. They can be church partners, but they can be a lot of private sector partners that we're working with now, but they can also be input suppliers, transporters, traders, a lot of trading communities that we work with, plus tech companies now that are helping pull all this together. You can imagine that if you asked me questions about project number 200, actually that's pretty tough to know about. So we're using technologies to get a better scan of what we're doing in the world, so that as an agency we can see what's happening and we can see how effective our investments are in terms of changing people's livelihoods on the ground. If you want to sort of think about the way that we operate, we try to work with full communities. This diagram, in a way, tries to show you a little bit about the skills, the talents, and the economic status of most of the people that we're working with. We divide the farming community into about 3 segments. So down here we have the most vulnerable people. These people are definitely living on less than $1 a day. And that's the sort of the main target of the work that we do. If I try and put some numbers up here, okay, so that gives you an idea there of the kinds of numbers of the people that we're working in these different segments. So if you get to the middle, what we call the build segment, this is a group of people who have more assets, they're stable if you like, but they're not taking full advantage of the skills and resources that they have. And we put a lot of skills training into that kind of community, that part of the community. But within every community, there's also a set of more entrepreneurial people. And in the past, we really haven't worked with those people very much. But what we're trying to do with the new strategy is to engage all of those people so that we have a process of, just to say this, in terms of where we're doing the kinds of investments and how we're investing, you can see at this bottom level, focusing on asset transfers, looking at this middle segment, looking at skills transfers, and then looking at linkage to services, and that's the more entrepreneurial side of the work that we're doing. And really we're trying to engage this idea of market push here and then market pull at the top. So if we can engage these different people in various parts of the agricultural cycle, then we can start to track people onto this pathway towards greater prosperity. Each of those people are going to have very different trajectories, and the part of the challenge of our work now is to really get a much better understanding of what is the real attributes of these different people and how quick is that transition up this kind of pathway. So that's what the agricultural sector, if you like, is trying to achieve. Just to play that out a little bit more, I'd like to show you what this kind of looks like on the ground. So if you remember those 3 segments, you'll have a CRS partner trainer who will work with a field agent. This is the person that works most closely with the farming community. And at the recover level, you're generally working with farmers that are not well organized, that have very few assets, and have very restricted links to markets. Most of these people will be net buyers on the marketplace, okay? So they are in a very difficult situation, and they are really sort of at prey to all of the worst things that can happen to communities, and they are the people that can very easily fall into an emergency situation or require much greater need for safety nets. And so if people drop down below here, then it gets to be very expensive to support those communities. In this middle zone, the change that we really see here is that farmers become more organized. They're in a farmer organization, they've usually chosen one or two commodities that they're going to be working with, and the type of market that they're working towards is much more clearly identified to them, okay? So once we get to this stage, there's a lot more opportunities for us to bring new skills to bear with those people so that they can accelerate their growth opportunities. At the top level, we're working with cooperatives usually. So here, the field agent is working with the management team. You can be working with hundreds of farmers within these co-ops. They are linked generally to more formal markets, and obviously investments at that level are going to have much accelerated returns on investment, if you like, to those communities. So the work that we're trying to do in many ways tries to do that, that sort of transition, increasing levels of organization, increasing levels of market engagement, increasing levels of market formalization, if you like. So that's the sort of trajectory that we're trying to do. So if you hold that thought in your minds, I'm just going to show you how we bring technology to bear at the different stages in that process. And one of the things that I would like to say with this is scale is really critical for this whole process. In the past, and I don't know if this, in the past, a lot of NGOs, and I would include CRS in this, we've tended to work down at this household level. Now you can have a lot of effect on a household, but you can't get to millions of households quickly, okay? So what has happened over the last 10 years is that we've started not just to work here, but we're shifting our attention to working at community and probably district level. And you heard Mariana talking about the local governments that she was working with. That's the kind of transition that we're seeing in agencies like ourselves. If we're going to get from thousands of people to several million people, we need to be working at different levels. And again, this is where technology can change a lot of the work that we're doing. It allows us ways to get to households by operating at these levels. And I think in the future, what you'll see is agencies like ourselves, we will be working much more at the national level, working with the governments and with agencies through the private sector that can really get to these much more scaled numbers. Okay, so that's a part of the rationale. The suite of tools that Steve mentioned, this is a series of products that we have not built ourselves, or not totally built, and we are basically configuring a series of different products so that we can provide a full service to the different agencies that we work with. So I'm going to be talking about the e-learning part, a map and track product, a way of registering farmers, and then using a business calculator to provide business advisory services to the community. Steve also mentioned Evaluate, and that is our M&E platform, and that's what we use to basically understand where did you start from and where did you get to by the end of the project, so that transition process. So again, we're trying to bring together 4 or 5 different products into one support system so that we can actually use technology at various stages in a project cycle. But really what we're aiming to do is to get to the point where we're providing information to farmers which helps them to increase productivity and profitability. So one of the first things that we're looking at here then is how do we improve scaled, standardized training. We have 5 skill sets that we think are really important for those farmer groups to take on. And basically those things are looking at improving the strength of a group. So we have a whole series of trainings working around how do we build a strong farmer organization. The second area that we look at is finances, and that can start with savings, but it can also get into loan situations, and then starting from a savings point, linking into more formal banking systems. NRM is natural resource management, so that's really looking at productivity. Marketing is an area that I think is new to a lot of extension organizations, but this is really looking at the market linkage part. And innovation, we think, is another important tool that people need because things go wrong all the time. Farming is one of those really horrible, risky businesses where things are guaranteed to go wrong all the time. whether it's climate, whether it's disease, whether it's prices, whether it's technology requirements. All of these things are changing rapidly, and so people need to understand, what do I need to know about my situation, and how do I test new ideas to quickly be able to adapt to that very changing environment. So those are the 5 skills. Now that's a lot of stuff there to be able to transfer to people. And so again, what we're doing here is working with the field agent. So the technology is focused here, and I think that was one of the questions you raised earlier, which is a very good question. We're focusing down here. It's basically the person who's nearest to the community that we're working with. And you'll see that we do start to leverage some of the phones that are used by the community, but really the focus of our technology transfer at the moment is that intermediary, the trusted intermediary. Okay? So we want to make sure that when that person is training these people, or this person is training these people, that they're using good practices, that we really know what they're doing when they go to the field. In the past, we've had a situation where you can imagine 100 partners all hiring 30 people. You basically end up training people with the skills the person arrives with. You hire them, they go do. We want to change that so that we train these people, they take tests, so that when they work with these people, we have a standardized approach, we know what they're training, and therefore we can start to track changes in performance based on what we would like people to learn, rather than the skills of the person that just turns up. Okay? I mean, these people obviously can be brilliant, but without some training, you're very unsure about the consistency and quality of that training. So the idea of having an e-learning platform then, something like this, we use a standard platform, is run by a company called Agilix. We've spent a lot of time building the content for those courses. We have many hours of these courses, but it goes through the different parts of those 5 skill sets, and it basically builds the skills of the people that we're working with. These are, highly interactive, and we can change them into different languages. And again, so this allows us to get to scale quickly in terms of the training process. And for the very first time, and obviously I'm saying this to people that do a lot of this sort of thing already, I imagine, but for us it's very new to be able to see the performance of the clients that we're working with in real time. And at the moment, we're doing a sort of a blend between face-to-face and virtual training, and we're slowly building out this process of being able to communicate ideas with people, to learn, to see how well the training is going. And then that becomes part of one of our performance metrics in terms of, if things are working well here, does that make a difference in terms of the outcomes that we'd like to see at the community level? All right. The next thing then, and this is a bit of an unknown to us, is if you're not actually in the country, how do we know where services are being delivered, which services are being delivered, and where are they being delivered to? So, very simple question. A lot of people in the country know this because they have lots of documentation written on this, but beyond that person's laptop, you can't see that data. So what we're doing here is we're introducing a technology on a smartphone, because we do want the GIS coordinates for this particular product. And basically this allows the field worker, when they go to visit those different farmer groups, to log in to say, I am Mr. X, I'm coming to see this farmer group, they are located here, and this is the GIS coordinates. And then they'll go through a series of menus to say which type of training or which type of services are they delivering to those particular farmer groups. And again, we want to gain a record of that, because we want to know, does that long investment of training in these different capacities, does that make a difference? First of all, we need to know, did they do the training in those places? So this provides us with a basic way of being able to map and track the different services that are being delivered. This is a pretty simple technology, but no extension services in the US, actually, or in any of the countries that we work in do this. China has just introduced it, and that's obviously a hugely scaled extension system, and the Chinese government has said this technology has had the most change on the quality and the understanding of their extension systems in the last 30 years. So simple technology, but provides a pretty interesting bit of data on who's going where and what they're doing. Now in the future, because these people all have mobile phones, we can also push money at these people. So this is the thing, we're working with the Kenyan government at the moment. We've got about 40 people that are testing this kind of technology, and basically what they're asking us to do is to say when they do deliver the service, they want to log that in and they want to be paid using mobile money. And that's something that we're negotiating with the government at the moment. I think is a brilliant idea, and it allows this suddenly to squeeze this cost problem that people have about extension agents. There's a huge amount of mistrust, I think, about whether extension agents really do get to the field or not. And this provides a way of transparency going both ways. But it also allows us to pay people for the services they do, rather than pay people what we think they've done. And that really does change the dynamic in the work that we're doing. When it comes to the business side, this is when we're linking farmers into various different types of markets, mainly into local markets. But as we see capacity grow, we are looking for opportunities to link farmers into more national markets and where it's appropriate into export markets. And so really what we're doing with this is the GROW group. We are trying to work with communities, identify the appropriate value chains, and then really get to this idea of increasing innovation, increasing linkage to services, and then adding value to products wherever we can do that. Now that makes a tremendous difference in the income of people and into the stability of the income that's going to those farming communities. So here we transition from just using technology to track and sort of record ideas into using technology to provide a service directly to people. And again, in the future, we want to do that at a fee. So here's a situation where you've got a field agent talking to a farmer. And so here we're using technology which is much more farmer-facing. So it's a different type of approach. And basically the software that is available to the extension agent here, it allows them to register the farmers, register farmers into groups. It then allows us to do some profitability analysis on one or two products that they're working on. We can help the farmer group write a business plan and then record that business plan. And then we track the progress through the season, and at the end we monitor sales. Now that whole process usually is done all on paper. It's very hard to see that data if you're standing at any distance to that kind of activity. So this really is a product which is a ledger, and it allows us to record that business process and then to also get an idea of what the data is in terms of the investments being made by the farming community and the returns they get to their investments. Okay, so now you won't be able to see this, but basically this is, if you can imagine, the basic compartments and elements of a business plan. And we can be looking at the farmer group, the product that they're looking for, and the intentions that they have in terms of a tonnage or something to sell. And then we also we take a sub-sample of maybe 3 or 4 farmers out of a group of 20, and then we do a pretty detailed analysis of all the costs and the costs of the loans that they're taking, and that gives us in the end an idea of the profitability that they're going to get, including the family labour and not including the family labour. Virtually all farming systems that we work in, no labour is really charged to the system, so it's quite hard for people to understand the cost of their businesses, but we're introducing that process to the farming community through this kind of software so that people can get an idea of basically the opportunity costs that they're involved in. So kind of more detailed information coming through here, and I think this, first of all, is an extremely useful process for the field agent. At the moment, they are generally only providing production advice because that's what they feel comfortable with doing. What this allows them to do is shift from being a food security advisor to being a business advisor. And so they, in using this software, learn pretty quickly what the business structure of most farms are on a few products that they work in. And as they start to do this with lots of farmers, they get a much better calibration, if you like, of the market opportunities for their farmers. And that really helps them to engage into a business conversation with those people. And I don't know if you can see this, but what this enables us to do in the back end, because as people take this data, when they synchronize that data, that goes into our cloud-based database, and then we can have a view, let's say in Malawi, for some soybean producers. These are the acres, 1, 2, 3, 4, down here. And you can see that most of the farmers, there's about 85%, 90% of those farmers are working on 1 acre. 1 acre or less. It's only down to this sort of 6 or 7% that have 4 acres. So you can see the segmentation just in land area, which is a huge factor in terms of what you invest and what you get as your return. But we can also see the profits that people are getting. So most of the farmers are getting about $100 for their return. And remember, this is probably the main income crop for them for that year. So you can also start to get a better understanding of really what is the cash flow looking like for these farmers. And when people talk to us about development and we say, well, we invest $100 million into agriculture, people expect to see extremely advanced farmers driving in Cadillacs because they must have made a ton of money. Well, when you work with millions of people, that amount of money is spread very, very thinly. And we're helping people to get probably an extra 20, 30, 40% in terms of their profit. But when you equate that down to actual farms, and these are generally pretty small farms, you're talking about $30, $50 gains per year. Now, over a year, that's not a great deal of money. So you really have to think about how does development change people and how does it change them over a number of years. It's a slow process in general terms. Yeah. There are some people, if you've got more assets in terms of land, you've got better water assets, you can produce higher value products, you can probably get into the thousands, perhaps the tens of thousands in terms of your income, but those are only 4 to 5% of most of the communities that we work with. And most of those 4 to 5% have not yet engaged in markets in a way which really uses their skills effectively. So this is a huge undertaking to transform smallholder agriculture from this very food security based system into this more commercial sector that we would like to see. This is something we have not done yet. So although that looks very impressive, it's really not yet. But what we're trying to do with this kind of aspirational thing is with our group to start to say, as we begin to use this technology, we will get this torrent of data coming at us. And for most people, as you know, data is a horrible thing. They just do not know what to do with it, and they would rather somebody else did something for them that they could actually understand. And so we're using Zoho reports in order to do a quick analysis of certain types of data that we get, so that people, when the data does come onto their computers, they can start to see, okay, what does that really mean? It helps me to understand the segmentation issue. It helps me to understand which crops people are investing in. It helps me to understand the level of investment, the level of return. So that kind of thing quickly gives people an idea of what is changing in the investments that they're starting to make. And whilst these are quite simple things, at the moment a lot of this information is really buried in the data on the desktops or the laptops of a very few people in a project. So Steve also mentioned this idea of
it's okay, we're good with time.
Oh, we're good with time? This idea of how is mobile money going to change things? And I've already said to you that you can start to see that using one technology gives you an opportunity to start bringing mobile money to play in this situation. And what we're also seeing is this idea of the whole of that field agent idea is now shifting away from what has always been traditionally for us a free service into what will become, I think, a totally fee-based service. So anything that we have where we can link any aspect to some sort of income gain, that will become a paid-for service. And so that's really changing the kind of the business models that we're using. So the technology that we're using, we will not be offering that free to the communities, if you like, or to the agencies that we work with. There will be a cost to using that technology. That's because it costs us money as well. So what we're trying to do is get the very best value from technology, but to be able to create that and use that in a way that is paid for by all the people that use that in the system. We're also looking at new financing models, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about things like impact investment and the huge amount of private capital that's now going into developing countries. Private capital completely dwarfs development capital or grant capital. So what we're also looking for in this process is to see how CRS in the next 5 years or so can start to use a lot more private capital in the way that it invests in these communities. And we are looking at technology as one of the ways that will attract private capital, because private capital, as you well know, is all based around the data that they can see. If there's no data, it's too risky for them to think about, but if they can start to see trends and ideas, they can start to see that it's, they have more confidence that they can start to invest in these different value chains and different communities that we're working with. So the PSP model, this is the private sector service provider. This is something that the microfinance team at CRS is leading, I think, in the world at the moment. As I said, traditionally, all service agents of any colour or flavour that we work with have generally been free, and they have been then restricted to the length of the project that we can invest in. With a private sector service provider, we basically hire entrepreneurs, we provide them with a training, we provide them with a business model, they are then deployed as entrepreneurs, and they continue to provide that service once the project ends. And we would like, as I said, to bring that to bear wherever it can be brought to bear. We would like to make the transition from free to fee. And just a final thought, and just getting to your comment again a little bit, actually. So how does this all relate back to the farming community? One of the things that we've seen is that when we do a lot of monitoring and evaluation, we are talking to the community, but it's only snapshots. And generally it's about things that we are doing in fairly formal evaluation processes. What we're currently testing, and we're about to test this in Zambia, is a farmer feedback loop, so that as we're deploying these different types of technology, it gets back to the farming community, and then they give us real-time feedback in whether they thought the services were effective, whether they were worth the money, and whether they achieved the types of gains that we want to see. And I think the future is going to be much more about feedback from communities telling us what works and what doesn't work. And we've always used different proxies to do that, but I think this is kind of an interesting time now where your client really has voice. So we want to build some platforms now using SMS, using IVR, the voice technology, using robocalling, but also using call centers, remote call centers. They may be in Johannesburg or Nairobi, but they can get down to any village, anywhere pretty much in Africa, and they will be literally calling people and asking them, you received this service on this date, can you give us feedback on whether you think that works or not? Because if it doesn't, we can make a change. If you think it does work, we can accelerate that kind of investment in other areas. So to wrap that all up then, as we move from this idea of food security to much more business services, we need to provide a much better or more consistent training approach to the field force that we're working with, and we need to be able to monitor that. So it's technology, but it's also being monitored consistently. We want to provide much more customized training to the different segments of the community that we're working with, and we want to be able to monitor and track the trajectories of those people. We want to move away from just sort of asset delivery ideas to providing people with real business support, so that they have much more confidence in investing that 10, that 20, that $50 that they have in income that they can afford to invest. And I think we're seeing that a lot of farmers are really demanding much more about this business side because they know how to farm. You can imagine they've been there for a while, right? And we come along and say, you know what, we know how to do this better than you. You can imagine what people think about that. You've really got to prove yourself about rice farming if you come from Illinois or somewhere, and somebody says, you know more about rice farming in India than I do? Okay, well, you tell me about it then. That is a bit of a struggle. But when it comes to business advice, what we're finding is that the field agents learn about this very quickly. They get a very good response from the farming community. And then it's a combination of the field agent learning with the farming community. And I think that's a very different dynamic and a really interesting one. and it really empowers that connection to the people that we're working with. And then the final thing is this privatization process. And when we're going into a private sector model in terms of selling our services, this is where I think you do see this transition a little bit away from open source to private, what is that called? Commercial products. And that's because we need to be completely reliant on that product. And we want to be very sure that when we deliver that for a fee, that if anything happens with that, we have a big, we have a technology team behind us that can make the changes quickly enough to overcome any problems that we have, or to really build out the latest ideas of technology. And so we are actually, I think, moving away from open source towards more commercial products because of that ability to scale and because of that robustness and reliability of the products. And that's all I have. So thank you very much.
We take about 3 minutes or so.
Do you want to start?
Oh, okay.
Yes.
This is one when for the dashboard to work that hasn't been implemented yet. I think the premise is the torrent of data to come through so that the dashboard would reflect actually what's happening.
Yes.
And I can imagine some kind of bottleneck there because the farmers might be happy because they received the microfinance money and then they could put the money into the land, the farming, and then they have a better result. But wouldn't it be considered an overhead to log in or report back the data? So who's providing the torrent of data to the system? Is that the farmer?
No, it's not the farmer. So at the moment, the model pretty much follows this. Yeah, it's pretty much this. So the data is being recorded by this person.
Agent.
Yeah. So at the moment, they are the person that has the technology. In most cases, they are still paid for by the project. So we have most control over this person.
So it's one of the responsibilities of the agent.
Yeah.
To provide the feedback with the actual data.
Yes, to provide the feedback in terms of the business planning process. They are providing that information to these people. But when they synchronize their technology, that information is going back to our database. In the future, what we would like to do is to get much more feedback from these people, but I don't think that we will be getting a lot of complicated data from them. It will be more to be, the sort of the satisfaction with the service, I think, at this stage. And the torrent hasn't happened yet. And part of the reason why we haven't fully built out the dashboard, I think, is because we need to figure out really what is important for people to know and make decisions on. And I think that's a lot of, what we've understood about dashboards is that if you build a dashboard too early, people get data that they don't know why they're getting it. So we have to sort of make sure that we're getting data that is really useful to them.
Can I just add one? Yeah, so I wonder if you are familiar with this conference called Mobile Development Conference, usually meeting in Brighton, UK, and this is the subject that they would love to, give a presentation on.
No, if you can put us in contact, we'd be very happy.
Sure.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. So.
So I really like the idea that the farmers eventually are providing feedback, because I kind of get this feeling of West knows best sometimes, and I really like the idea of moving away from that. However, inside of that, I haven't heard anything today about the preservation of the knowledge base that local communities have that technology is trying to capture. I mean, at least in the way that technology is developed in the Western world, we've all kind of forgotten about some very basic skills because we just rely on technology now. It's become almost a science for us to do things. And so, this could be great, and then 25 years out, rice farming might be more of a science than it is an art. So what's going on with CRS and their ability to capture local knowledge and preserve that?
That is a
using
great
technology?
question. I'm not sure I totally know the answer to that. I think that when it comes to working with the farming community, we obviously compare what they do against a new technology that we bring in. So if it is a new variety, and normally it's something like a new variety which is resistant to a disease which is particularly prevalent in that area. That's the kind of change that we're usually talking about. And so what we always do with those kind of technologies is we will have a lot of demonstrations to show this is the new technology against the existing technology. Now, if that clearly shows that the existing technology is still much better, we will not promote something that we know is not as good as the local technology. But what I do find is that people, and I can give you some classic examples of this, but if you are, as a field agent, given instructions to provide a new variety to a community, you don't really know a huge amount about the community and how they're dealing with their current variety quite often. So when I was talking to some farmers in Sierra Leone about that, they had a huge demonstration plot of the new variety. And so I was saying to these farmers, well, what do you think about this? And they said, yeah, it's great. And they said, good. And I said, so do you grow that on your farm? So they said, no, of course not. Who would do that? And so I was saying, well, yeah, the idea of the demo is that you learn and you go to your farm. And they said, no, you don't want to do that. Our varieties, we get 2 harvests a year. Your variety only gets 1. You need your labor at this time of the year when we're doing something else. And actually, we have a fantastic market for our local rice. And the variety that you have doesn't quite meet the same standards. So we are providing a technology which works. If you can compare one season to one season, it's much better. But when you start to ask the community about how they actually market things and what their costs are, not so good. And I think in the past what we tended to do, and this is where I think business information really helps, tended to focus much more on the physical properties rather than the social and economic properties. And I think, as you start to collect more information just about the business side of what people do, you get much better insights into how they use labor and how they use land and how they use different seasonalities. And I think that protects a little bit about what works for them. So I think it's more a question of the more you know, the more you can help. And I think this does help them to learn more about, local requirements. But in general, we don't meet that criteria that you're talking about, but maybe in the future we can start to do more of that. Yeah.
Okay, we'll take one quick question.
How do you choose the field agents? Because farmers, because they're so much focused on farming, when somebody is getting technology to them, how do they develop that trust level? And especially for just $50 a year profit, how do they buy that thing? That this is going to help us and this person is here to help us.
Right. So how do you build trust with the communities?
How do you choose the field agent first, and then, because trust is more important than moving forward with these kind of programs. So what's the process?
So there, depending on the type of project that you're working in, you're going to have different criteria for the selection of people. Generally, we are looking for people in a scaled project, which would be, they would have certain certificates in agriculture, they would have certain experience in agriculture, and then we would use that as the basic criteria for selection. But the question about as you move from free to fees is a slightly different one. So as we make that transition, we're looking for people also with entrepreneurial skills. So there is a different set of criteria depending on what kind of role we're looking for people. So in the future, it will be more about people that are not just arriving to get a job. It'll be people that are coming to us because they would like to learn a skill that they can build into a business for themselves. So that will be a combination of sort of leadership skills, entrepreneurial skills, plus experience in the sector that we're working in. Building trust with the community takes time, so that's not an immediate thing. But a lot of the people that we work with come from those areas, so they're part of the communities. So they're not usually outsiders, if you like. CRS is, unlike a lot of organizations, we don't directly implement. We always implement through local partners and communities. getting this trust about business advice, I think, is a very good question, because that is something that we're really testing at the moment. And what we're finding is that it takes time for the field agents to learn about the business prospects of the farmers that they're working with, because they weren't doing that in the past. So I would say it probably takes them 1 to 2 years to get the trust of the farmers that they're really making good business advice to them. But I think, as I said, I think it really changes the dynamic between a field agent who gives you something free, which may or may not work, and somebody who says, I would like to help you make more money. Because then it engages the farmers much more. They're much more willing to work with those people.
Thank you, Shaun. Dorothy?